Hey there, welcome back to another video. Today I'm talking about presuppositionalism, why it's not a real school of thought in philosophy, but rather that it points to a necessary part of good reasoning. And that someone who tells you, oh, you're just a presuppositionalist, that's why you think that way, is actually not analyzing the presuppositional basis for their own argument and for their own method of reasoning, and they're actually reasoning poorly. It's actually an admission by being told that you're a presuppositionalist. Your opponent is admitting that they've lost the argument. Okay, so this is how to spot that kind of thing, and how to avoid that kind of situation in the future. Okay, you can get a head start on not wasting your time with retards by understanding, being able to see the key points in someone's reasoning before they're even aware of them, so that you can walk away before the argument gets too heated. So presuppositionalism is the purported philosophy in which the assumption in an argument is the primary concern. Now, there are three parts to an argument, as can be clearly demonstrated by the argument form, modus ponens. There is an assumption. Let's say if P, then Q is our assumption. And then there's at least one bit of evidence that is layered on the basis of that assumption. Let's take P as given. And then from this, we can logically deduce Q. If our assumption is if P then Q, and we have P as given, then we can deduce Q as our conclusion or our claim. Okay. So someone who is a presuppositionalist is primarily concerned with this part of the argument and not concerned, perhaps enough, with this, with the evidence in support of your argument or the claim itself that's being supported. Now, all three of these are necessary for a logical argument, for reasoning to take place. Okay. And I would argue that the assumption is the most important bit. If you don't have your assumption in order, if it's not true, then your argument, if it is true, is only coincidentally true. So the truth of your argument is not really in the claim itself, but in the assumption. It's not in the evidence, because the evidence needs to be based on an assumption of some sort. Okay? So we can take this claim and we can reverse engineer an assumption of some sort. Okay, we have Q as our claim. We backtrack. We say, okay, we have P as evidence. Well, then how did we get Q from P? Because we assumed that if P is the case, then we get Q, right? Now you can plug in literally any noun for P and any noun for Q, and what you'll have is a valid argument, logically speaking. But is it cogent? Is it true? Well, that depends on how true your assumption is. So if you're in a heated debate with someone and you're questioning sources. I don't mean like sources of like empirical authority, although someone's ultimate source of authority could be an empirical source, and that would be to commit the mechanistic fallacy. We can push, when push comes to shove, what is your opponent's fallback, right? Whenever they start to get heated, whenever they lose their cool, what do they say? Do they say, well, it's what science says? Well, then they're placing man as their ultimate authority. Other dudes who simply do science, who necessarily are not necessarily any smarter or any wiser than you or I. Okay. If someone says, when push comes to shove, well, that's just how I feel, then they're appealing to emotions. Okay. appeal to false authority. Fallacy, appeal to emotions. It's also a fallacy. It's bad reasoning. Okay, but we have to have some assumption, right? When push comes to shove and we're backed into the corner, we have to say, well, it's just because I have faith in X, Y, or Z. So choose your X, Y, or Z extremely carefully. Okay. Now, if that X, Y, or Z is one's emotions, then that's bad reasoning. That's not an ultimate authority that can account for all knowledge, all wisdom that we can conceive of, right? Because it's entirely subjective. We can't say that that X, Y, or Z, that assumptive source of knowledge is scientific reasoning, because that, again, is just to place our complete faith in other men who have their own goals, who have their own ends toward which their scientific process and methods are serving. And ultimately, we're placing our faith in the ends that other men have freely chosen for themselves. And we can't know, the totality of motivations behind the scientific institutions of the world. It's absurd. Okay? There has to be one thing that we all ultimately can fall back on. It's the thing that serves as the assumption of all arguments, all belief systems, all forms of reasoning in every conceivable way possible, that can account for not only an entire body of knowledge and wisdom that we can have access to as humans, but everything beyond that, and also the process of reasoning itself, which must be immaterial. Okay, because even scientific reasoning uses mathematics as its language, and mathematics is immaterial. Even though people who are, subscribe to scientism as their religion, atheistic type thinkers will say that empirical evidence is their God. That's not sustainable, because in order to measure that, they're so concerned with measuring the objects of their evidence. They are still appealing to something immaterial. So what's the source of mathematics? What's the source of logic, of this formal style of reasoning? Universal assumption. Truth with a capital T. Call it God if you want. God is just a personified conception of truth with a capital T. Truth is formless. It has no form. It has no content to it. But conversely, it's the thing that, and paradoxically, is the thing that contains all content. Okay? God's just the personified, the conscious perception of truth with a capital T. This is the thing that must remain when you reverse engineer your reasoning in any argument, in any belief, in any statement that you make about anything ever. This should be the assumption that remains. It's the only thing that can grant sensibility and legitimacy and existence to any and all things. Okay? So this is our ultimate value. What you ultimately assume is what you value most deeply. If you value truth, then you are open to all knowledge and all wisdom. You have access to everything. You have to value over and above all else that which is true is revealed. But you should be mentally, stoically indifferent toward what specifics that truth entails. Have no emotional attachment to that truth taking one form or another, but simply value truth itself. There are no things that happen in the world that are good or bad. Good and bad, good and evil, are a mere product of the divine being. Okay? Only the human will is capable of producing something good or producing something evil. And the fewer attachments that it has, the fewer conditions attached to your thoughts, your actions, your words, the truer and better and more pure they are. So in a sense, truth comes down to purity. All right. The more conditions, the more expectations, the more attachments, external attachments you have within your relationships, your statements, your actions, everything else, the closer to evil they are. Okay. So, to be called a presuppositionalist is not to be called a bad name. It just means that you're good at reasoning. You are putting value in one of the necessary levels of the argument, and ultimately the one that is most important. Because if we cannot trace our claim and our evidence and our whole process of reasoning back to something that's actually true, i.e., truth itself, then we are reasoning poorly. Okay? You always have faith in something. You too, atheists, you don't just get to not believe in something, because if you don't believe in truth with a capital T or God with a capital G, you're going to outsource your authority towards something else. Probably dudes doing science in a lab somewhere who are ultimately following the authority of someone else, some other dude. So do you want to take that risk? No. It's not only wrong and fallacious, but it's fucking gay. Hope you enjoyed the video today. See you in the next one, guys. Cheers.